Yeah.
Congressman Massey. Governor DeSantis has really good plans for if he becomes president. But what I want to know is if the makeup of Congress is basically the same as it is today, how is anything going to get through, even though he would be vice president?
So she asked about the makeup of Congress and how could you get anything done as president with the dysfunctional Congress we have now, even though we're in the majority.
Right.
And so that hurts because I agree with you. No, I agree with you. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time on the bus with Governor DeSantis asking him, how did you get this done? Or how did you get that done? Did you do it by executive order or did you work through your legislature? And he said, I worked through the legislature. Because if you do it by executive order all the time, it only stays as long as you're an executive. And so that's another reason I'm backing Ron DeSantis, is he worked in the Congress for 6 years, and then he's had to work with his legislature. Ours is certainly dysfunctional. I can tell you, you have at least 2 other candidates who are bashing members of Congress right now. That doesn't make sense. Like, even your worst enemy in Congress, you have to acknowledge that it's going to go through them to become law. And, you know, one of the things that I wish Trump had done, and I'm not, you know, I don't want to pick on him, but he should have pushed back a little bit more on the legislature, like Governor DeSantis did on his legislature. Let me give you an example. They drew a map of congressional districts that would have put us in a minority. Governor DeSantis said, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, your map's not good enough. And you use that veto power, you tell them to go back to the drawing board, because you can use that veto pen. I wish President Trump had used his veto pen when, honestly, frankly, Paul Ryan was there for half of it. Paul Ryan got one over on Trump. He did 2 omnibus bills that never had money for a wall in it, and several CRs, and convinced, and every time Trump would sign it, and I didn't vote for any of those, okay? Every time he would sign, he said, I'm never signing one of these again, because it doesn't have my wall. I will never sign a note. And then it would be 6 months later and he would sign one. I think if Congress realizes that veto threat is real, you don't use it every time, you use it occasionally, and then you will never have to use it all the time. And I think just by standing on principle, telling Congress, you send me this bill, I'll veto it, you may have to veto a couple of those. After that, they're going to realize they're just wasting their time if they don't put your priorities. He's going to have a mandate. This is the other thing. When I watch him stand here and say to you the same thing he said in Iowa, when I was in Iowa, when he becomes the candidate, based on principles and policies that he's answering, like the foreign policy and everything else, he's got a mandate that Congress does not. Okay? If we can't get out of our own way, and he stands strong as the executive like he did in Florida, but respects that everything has to go through the legislature, so he doesn't bash even people, you know, that he disagrees with. I think that's how you get it done, with leadership from the executive branch, while still honoring the fact that the lawmakers make the laws.
Yeah, I mean, you have certain tools at your disposal. You have certain leverage, and you use the leverage to be able to engineer the good policy outcome. And there's different issues. You know, as governor of Florida, I vetoed one year. I have line item veto, so I can veto individual spending items in the budget. I vetoed 3% of the entire budget, $3.3 billion. No one had ever even vetoed more than $800 million before, but we did that, and that's part of the reason we've been able to pay down 25% of our state's debt. There's also things with Congress that you can put into this Senate vehicle that you only need 50 votes for, budget reconciliation. Biden got his whole agenda almost through because he stuffed it all in that. So that gives us opportunities to stuff things in that. And we are going to expand the majorities in the House and Senate with me winning the presidency. That's just the top of the ticket bringing in. That will happen. We're not going to have 60 senators, although we would be on the verge of 60 senators if we haven't blown so many of these Senate races as Republicans, Georgia races, these other races. It's been a total catastrophe, you know, what's happened. We don't blow races in Florida. We win all these races, so that's part of that. But I also think, just stepping back, Washington's not wired to work. The incentives are bad. And so how would you change the incentives? I mean, I would do what I'd like to see, and I'll have to work through the states to do it. Term limits for members of Congress. balanced budget requirement. We have it in the states. Why should Congress not have to do it? And I would like to see the president have that line item veto. So if they put a big spending bill, you would be able to hack out a lot of stuff. The reason why, I mean, we've all seen our government will fund promotion of transgenderism in Bangladesh. Like, seriously, that has been something that money has gone to. And you scratch your head going, how could this possibly ever happen? Well, the reason it happens is because they put the massive spending on the desk, and the president has two choices: sign everything into law or veto everything and fund nothing. So a lot of times they end up signing because there's bad stuff, but they need the quote good stuff. If you had that line item veto, you would be able to do so much of that. So you've got to work through the states to be able to get that done. But that would change the incentives, I think, in a positive way. And that's the thing. I understand when you're working with the legislative body, they're not just going to do because you say. You need to show them that what they're doing is in their interest as well. And part of that means what you're doing is resonating with the people back home. You know, Ronald Reagan went over the heads of Congress. He never had a Republican House in 8 years, and he was able to get a lot done, particularly in his first few years. And it's because the people were telling the representatives to back his program. And we need to do that. But that requires having a president that's pursuing policies that are resonating with Americans back home, not focused on Wall Street donors, not focused on your personal issues, but focused on the American people's issues. And I'm really the only guy that's focusing on those issues, and I think it will make a big difference. And I think we'll have a groundswell to say, you know what, we need to change the way Washington operates. We need to start worrying about people outside of Washington, stop doing what's best for the insiders. And I think we'll create a lot of positive momentum. So I'm looking forward to it.
If I could add one more thing, if we get the wrong presidential candidate, we will lose the majority in the House, because that tide floats and sinks our votes too. And in fact, you've got a seat here in New Hampshire that could be Republican. And that could go either way, depending on which candidate we get. And there's one candidate that liberals will crawl through broken glass to vote against. And while they're in that voting booth, they will vote against the congressman of that party. And I don't know about the national polls right now, and if you believe them or not, but if you look at our congressional polls and our Senate polls, there is one candidate that is likely to take away, not intentionally, I mean, he wants us to be in the majority, but he just drives a certain turnout that will cost us the majority and will keep you from having a Republican representative.
I mean, I saw this firsthand when and Thomas was in Congress. So we got in. We had each had two-year terms under Obama, and so my district, I'm in. I have places like St. Augustine, Daytona Beach, Florida in my district, which is a relatively Republican district. I don't know. I won it by 15, 20, 25 points, something like that each time I ran. So it wasn't like this is a liberal district, and I would do town halls. And it basically was like a conservative pep rally, right? Like, those were the people that wanted to come out. They wanted, all the questions were red meat, whatever. Trump gets elected. And this is a district that was not liberal at all. All of a sudden, these people come out of the woodwork. Like fire out of their eyes. They were so upset. And they're screaming, just yelling this or that. And you could tell, he energized something in that electorate where probably a lot of those people didn't even vote in the presidential, and now all of a sudden they're there. And 2018 was a massive blue wave, and I ran in 2018 and was able to surmount that, and then I obviously won again in 22. I won by 0.5% in 18. I won by 20% in 22. So when people were asked, you voted against him in 18, then you voted for him, the most frequent response was, well, I only voted against, I didn't really have anything against him in 18, I just voted against him because Trump was supporting him. Then in 22, Trump wasn't a factor. Actually, Trump was attacking me before my re-election, why he would do that when we're trying to win, I don't know, but that's just how he rolls. So he actually not only didn't support, he attacked me, and we won by that. And I think it was because there were just some voters, that is just a deal breaker for them. So just as Republicans, I mean, we've run this playbook now, 2018, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, the disappointments. Do you think that somehow there's all of a sudden these huge group of voters who voted against Trump and his candidates for years that are all of a sudden going to flip and vote the other way now all of a sudden? That's just not how this stuff works. And it's not about the midterm election, now granted, we did it in Florida, Iowa did great, there's some states that did fine, but most of the Republicans, it was a major face plant. We've never had more favorable conditions to win than 2022. You have a president that's clearly out of his element, clearly past his prime, and is just failing across the board. Inflation at that time was running 9%. You have an invasion at the southern border. You've got international instability. You've got crime roiling a lot of our major cities. Like, what can you point to? That should have been a ready-made thing to just have a massive wave in our favor. And we did have a wave in Florida. We had a wave in Iowa. You know, the Georgia governor did really well. But those candidates that they could tag and run the Trump playbook against, they either lost or they really underperformed, even in that favorable environment. So I think we've seen that, and we've shown how in Florida it can work. You've seen it in a couple other states, but I think we know kind of a good trajectory for the party, and I think we know, one, that there's going to be a lot of turbulence.